Hope you need to turn on your audio.
Let's try speaking with the audio on. See if it makes a difference. And thank you, Sue. So starting over again, I'm Hope Preston, and this is the Washington County Master Gardeners monthly speakers series. We took a couple of months off over the summer, but we are back now. And our speaker this evening is Lynn Kunstman, who's coming to us from Washington County. I'm from Jackson County, and she's speaking about native plants and saving nature 1 yard at a time. And I have to tell you, Lynn, I love that title because it really says that each of us can make a difference. And just as regular homeowners with front yards and backyards, that if we're doing the right things, which you will tell us about, it can really make a difference. So Lynn, as I said, comes to us from Jackson County. She's been a lifelong gardener, starting with in California. She now, after retirement, moved to Medford, and she has a huge vegetable garden that she is able to get food crops from year-round. She's been a master gardener since 2012, and then a master food preserver since 2013. I'd love to see your basement. It must be just full of cans.
No
Most recently, her focus has been on gardening for wildlife and pollinators. She has a 1/4-acre lot in Medford, and that is certified as a monarch way station and a pollinator garden and wildlife habitat. So Lynn, welcome and take over.
All right, thank you so much. Well, I have fond memories of
hang on. There's one part I always forget, Lynn, and that is to say to the participants, if you have questions, if you would please put them in the Q&A, and then at the end of the presentation, I will sort through them and group them by topic and turn them over to Lynn to answer. Lynn, now you may speak.
Great. Well, I have fond memories of Washington County. My son went to pharmacist school up there and lived in Beaverton for several years. So I'm familiar with parts of Washington County. Glad to see there's a huge crowd of people on here. That's really wonderful. I'm not sure how new this is going to be to anybody. If you have read any of Doug Tallamy's books or seen him on YouTube, you know what this message is that I'm about to give you. So yes, it is a message of hope, saving nature 1 yard at a time. Because these are actions we can take with the property we own. So this is based on Doug Tallamy's Nature's Best Hope, his second book, and with thanks to Tom Landis and Susie Savoy for some photographs that are in this presentation. So this is the book itself. If you haven't read it, it's a wonderful book, and everybody should be reading Dr. Tallamy. He is a consummate teacher. Better yet, go to YouTube and look for him and watch his presentations. He really is a master teacher, and his message is an important one. If you want to watch a video, Restoring the Little Things That Run the World is his presentation to a West Coast group, the California Native Plant Society. And I really recommend that because it has examples of plants from our Western and especially Southwestern Oregon, where I'm from, because we are in California, floristic ecoregion. So look for him online. He is really delightful. Oh, and so as an old teacher, I like to give this as a homework assignment. So either go and watch the video or read his book. So the problem, what is it and why should we care? There is currently worldwide an insect apocalypse, and it's not a joke and it's not hyperbole. Insects worldwide have diminished by about 45%. So that's overall. In stream systems, sometimes those insect populations are down 96%, which should be terrifying to everybody. Loss of native habitat, obviously, the more we build, the more roads and strip malls and apartment houses and all the things that humans use, we're pushing nature out. Loss of 3 billion North American birds in the last 30 years because of what we're growing in the areas we do replant around the buildings we put in. And loss of other wildlife, lots and lots of problems there. And the drivers of the loss are industrial agriculture, which now we till fence line to fence line or road to road. We don't leave any strips of native vegetation anywhere on our agricultural lands for pollinators and other wildlife to take refuge in. Roads and their hazards, we all know about how many deer get hit on the roads, but birds also are impacted by cars, insects as well. Unnecessary lights, this is huge, and we'll talk about it later in the presentation. Tens of millions of acres of sterile lawn, and that's where you as a homeowner have some control. Widespread destruction and displacement of native plants. So everywhere we turn, we are ripping out the natives and putting in things that never grew here before. So we didn't go about our lives deciding to sterilize the planet, but it has happened, and even over my lifetime. When I was a young child, and we used to drive across the state of California from the Bay Area to Yosemite, which was a 4-hour drive for summer vacation, we had to stop every 45 minutes to an hour and clean a windshield that looked like this. It was covered with bugs, splattered, you couldn't see through it. That's what driving in California looked like, and probably in Oregon too, through the Willamette Valley, in the 50s and 60s. This is my car. This blue Subaru is my car when I took a trip to Corvallis in July of 2023, from Medford to Corvallis, and there are the bug impacts on my windshield. My grandchildren think this is perfectly normal, just like I think it's perfectly normal to look up in the sky and not see a passenger pigeon anywhere, because I don't know what passenger pigeons are, because of this, what's called in ecology, a shifting baseline. Each generation thinks what they're looking at outside is the normal world. It is not. Things are moving, populations are moving down. There are no more passenger pigeons. They used to darken the skies for hours when they flew over areas in this country. So the shifting baseline is a real phenomena. And people need to recognize that we're not seeing the nature that should be out there. So that's a really important concept. So we can't survive without insects. And those insects support our food webs. After plants, insects are the next energy level of consumption that mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fish all depend on. So plus they provide our pollination services, and we all know about the problems with bees. These are honeybees, which are non-native to North America. They are European honeybees, but we have hundreds and hundreds. In Oregon, there are over 800 species of native bee, which these bees are competing with. And so our native bees are in real trouble because they have to compete with these invasive non-native honeybees. How can we turn this around? So this is, as we go through the slideshow, you're going to see some information on the slides. You'll see a picture of a plant and possibly a pollinator, mostly Lepidoptera like this, and the Latin name. And then in pink, you'll see the number of caterpillars that are supported by that plant. So we can turn it around and reverse the insect decline, save nature and all of our beautiful birds as well. My slide is not advancing. By making our yards and public spaces look like this. And the reason to have it look like this is because if birds are depending on insects for food, they need to find the insects on native vegetation, and native vegetation has to be available for those insects to eat. And we want our yards and public places to look like this and not like this. These are sterile environments, lawns and ball and boxes shrubs from the big box stores from Asia and Europe, instead of native plants. So we need native plants like red flowering currant, which hosts 81 different species of moth and butterfly. So on this plant with this beautiful flower, you can have 81 species of moth and butterfly growing and providing food for birds. You focus on the land that is easiest to fix. Your own property. You have total control over that. You can decide whether you want a sterile yard or you want a yard that's full of life. Native insects specialize on eating native plants. They cannot eat the plants that come to us from Asia or Europe or Africa or Australia. They need our native plants. 90% of the insects that eat the plants can only develop and reproduce on those plants they share an evolutionary history with. So this is a perfect example. This is a California pipe vine, Aristolochia californica, and it is the sole host to this beautiful butterfly, the California pipe vine swallowtail butterfly. If this vine isn't around, these butterflies cannot reproduce. They have to lay their eggs on this plant, just like a monarch has to lay its eggs on milkweed. So native plants have adapted to their hungry caterpillars. You don't have to worry about your plants being defoliated. Everybody gets along. And Dr. Tallamy says, like it or not, gardeners have become important players in the management of our nation's wildlife. So step one to get to where we need to be is to remove at least half your lawn. And I know people are attached to their lawns, but we're only asking you to take out half. Lawns don't support native insects. They don't build or protect the soil. They waste and pollute water. We know that because people are dumping chemicals on them all the time, and those chemicals leach out and run into the streams. We overwater them. We put chemicals on them. They pollute the air because we're using lawnmowers, 2-cycle engine lawnmowers, which actually produce more pollution than your car, and leaf blowers. Neither of those machines has a catalytic converter like your car does. And so they are pouring out all kinds of pollutants into the air. So here's a summary of what we do with our lawns every year. We have 45 million acres of lawn in the US. That is over twice the amount of acreage that we have in national parks. 2 billion gallons of gas for lawn equipment. We're putting 41 billion pounds of CO2 from our leaf blowers and mowers into the air. 13 billion pounds of other toxic and carcinogenic air pollutants are emitted from those mowers and blowers. 100 million pounds of lawn chemicals and fertilizers, and 9 billion gallons of water a day. And then you repeat that every year. And remember that in municipalities like I live in Medford, or if you're in Portland, or you're up, in a town, you're using potable water that has been treated for human consumption to irrigate your lawn, unless you are on a some kind of a irrigation district and are getting irrigation water from a reservoir that's non-potable, but most people are irrigating with potable water. So you can reduce the size of your lawn, let some of it grow into wildflowers, leave some paths, leave a play area. Or do this, you've got a play area over here, but this has been given over to plants that will support bees, butterflies, moths, and other beneficial insects. predatory wasps and that kind of stuff. So here's what turf grass does for us. Absolutely nothing. That's a 6-inch root zone. We have to water it all the time. That is really a problem. Our native plants, herbaceous plants and grasses, our bunch grasses like these, have these long roots, and that some of them 15 or more feet long. And they will get down into the soil, into the water that's available low in the soil strata. You will not have to water them as often. They hold the soil. They pump carbon down into the soil. So they are machines that are taking carbon out of the air and putting it down 10, 15 feet into the soil, where it will stay for 1,000 years. This is what, you know, our grasslands, our prairies look like. These are the roots of those grasses. It's why our prairie soils were so dark and fertile. All that carbon was being stored in those soils before we started tilling them up. So the roots act like sponges and they control flooding, all kinds of things. By removing half the lawns nationwide, we can add more, and then planting those that removed lawn space with native plants, we can add more native acreage than Everglades, Yellowstone, Yosemite, Grand Canyon, Mount Rainier, Grand Tetons, Canyonlands, North Cascades, Badlands, Olympic, Sequoia, Denali, and the Great Smoky Mountains National Parks combined. And so Dr. Tallamy refers to this as homegrown national park. Take out half your lawn and then go to the Homegrown National Park website and get on the map as part of this new movement. So we've removed half the lawn, or we hope you're thinking about removing half the lawn. It's not hard to do. Step 2 is remove as much as possible non-native and invasive plants. Now, there is a publication online called Garden Smart Oregon, a guide to non-invasive plants, which gives you the invasives and then tells you what to substitute. This is fennel. I used to grow this in my garden because I love the seeds. Highly invasive. The birds eat the seeds. They go out somewhere and they poop the seeds out. And then the fennel is growing in our meadows and creek beds and other places. It's highly invasive. It is on the invasive species list. This you all recognize as butterfly bush, Buddleia. This is growing in the Kalmiopsis wilderness. Now, nobody walked out there and put it there. Birds, again, are dispersing the seeds from this, and it is now also on the no-sell list in nurseries in Oregon. You can buy what is called a sterile form of this bush, but they won't sell you the bushes that will produce seed anymore. And I have a big problem with the idea of sterile nursery stock, because Bradford pear was supposed to be a sterile nursery tree, and it has spread like wildfire across the eastern seaboard. It's the premier invasive species there. So we don't intend to ruin our ecosystems with these plants, but they get away from us, they get out of our yards, and they start causing trouble. Here's English laurel in the forest in Portland. Here's ivy in the forest in Portland, choking the Doug fir. This is Scotch broom. Everybody knows what that looks like. You can think of lots of them. Pampas grass. I mean, there's many other burning bush, all kinds of things. So make sure when you go to the nursery that you're not buying invasive species at the very least. If you're buying a non-native, make sure it's one that is just not a detractor in the ecosystem. So step 3 would then be, if you've taken out some of those native or non-native plants that are not beneficial to our wildlife, and you need to replace them with some native plants. So step 3, put in some native plants. So here is mock orange. Don't ask for mock orange. Do never ask for a plant by its common name at the nursery, because they will give you a mock orange from China. That's not our Western mock orange. This is Lewis's mock orange. It's a Western native. It's fragrant. It does smell like oranges. It's lovely bush. So always know the scientific name of the plant that you are wanting to purchase. So we have to start thinking differently about our gardens. If you're like me, when you started gardening, you'd go to the nursery, see this wonderful plant, think, oh, that's so cool. I'm going to take it home and put it in my yard. Of course, there's no space in the yard because everything, it's jammed full of plants that I've already fallen in love with, and put it in the yard, and it's gorgeous. And it's doing nothing. I'm making a choice because of its decorative value, or it works as a screen like that English laurel, or it's a focal point like the crepe myrtle, or it's an anchor. It's part of a theme of plants that I'm putting in, like azaleas. I'm putting in azaleas from Asia. So all those choices are fine for gardening, but they are solely decorative. They are solely for your enjoyment, and they end up sterilizing the environment for other parts of nature. So now when you go to the nursery and you're making selections for plant purchases, you'll be considering the functional aspects of those plants. Is it going to sequester carbon? Does it have deep, deep roots so that it's going to need less water and it's going to be pumping carbon into the ground? Is it going to provide shelter and food for wildlife? Lots of different kinds of wildlife. Does it have food web value? In other words, are insects laying their eggs in it and able to then produce food for the rest of the food web? Is it stabilizing soil? Is it restoring the soil, that pumping of carbon into the soil and building soil and mycorrhizal connections in the soil? Is it moderating weather? Trees can change the temperature around your house by 15 degrees. Shade from trees is an important thing in an era when summer temperatures are getting bigger and bigger. And does it provide pollinator habitat? Are there plants that are providing long seasonal nectar and pollen for our native and our honeybee pollinators? The honeybees are here. We're not going to get rid of them because we like honey, but we want to make sure we're providing lots of nectar and pollen for those. So native plants build the soil and they sequester carbon. They provide food for our native insects. And 90% of our insects have to eat native plants. They can't make the switch to Asian or European plants. And our native caterpillars have to eat native plants. So anything that's a moth or a butterfly has to lay their eggs on our native vegetation. Here's red twig dogwood. It supports 54 different species of moth and butterfly. So just like milkweed supports one butterfly, the monarch, dogwood is a much more powerful plant to put in your yard because you'll get 54 different kinds of moth and butterfly from that one plant. All right. So why do I keep talking about caterpillars? Well, they are essential to most bird group reproduction. So we have titmice and bush tits and chickadees, these tiny little birds, and they all are insect eaters. They all have to feed their young insects. They forage in the branches of trees and shrubs, so you need to be putting native trees and shrubs in your yard, and they're found in mixed flocks that are called gleaning guilds, and they glean insects for food. So they're going to go through and pull those little insects off as long as they're in your shrubbery. And my slide does not want to change. Okay, so here's a chickadee. It weighs 0.35 ounces. That's the weight of 4 pennies. If you think about holding 4 pennies in the palm of your hand, that's how much that little bird weighs. And that little bird, to pull off a clutch of young, has to catch 6,200 to 9,000 caterpillars. That's one nest of young. And chickadees will often have 2 to 3 clutches a year. So these little birds are working from sun up to sundown, and they can only work within about, a 50-yard radius of the nest. They can't fly miles to find insects. They've got to find them nearby. And the more vegetation you put in that produces these caterpillars, the more success you're going to have and the more birds you're going to see in your yard. So if you want chickadees, you have to grow the trees and shrubs that grow the caterpillars that they eat. And why caterpillars? So not all insects are the same. Yes, other birds eat spiders and they eat other bugs that they find, but caterpillars, the Lepidoptera, the moths and butterflies, there's a specific reason we want to be growing those in our yard. It could be because they're beautiful, they're pretty, they've got all kinds of weird stuff going on. And they have really cool names like Painted Lady and Cecropia. But really it's because a caterpillar is soft. It doesn't have a big exoskeleton, tank-like exoskeleton like a beetle, which is crunchy and hard. It's large. It's like a big monster bratwurst. It's high in protein. It's high in fats, and it's the best source of carotenoids, which are the compounds that put color into birds' feathers. And they're easy for the parent birds to stuff down a baby bird's throat, right? And they go down easy and they go down quick, and the parents can go and get more food. There can't be any chickadees where we don't have enough caterpillars. And we want more than chickadees, and most other birds are much bigger. So most of our perching birds in North America, about 95% of our birds, have to feed insects to their young. The only birds that are not in decline in the US are the birds that can feed seed to their young, things like doves and finches, who can actually make kind of a seed milk that they then regurgitate into the young's throats. Those birds are not in decline because people put out bird feeders for them. They think they're doing good for all birds when they put out seeds, not helping most songbirds who have to feed insect food. We want warblers. We want our orange crown and Townsend and yellow rump warblers, and they glean insects from trees and shrubs. Here's coffeeberry. We want thrushes and bluebirds and robins. They're foraging for insect food through leaf litter, fallen leaves of trees and shrubs. If you rake up all your leaves and put them in the bag and send them to the landfill, these birds cannot find food, winter food, nor can they find food for their young. Woodpeckers and yellow-bellied sapsuckers and northern flickers. These birds, we want wrens that forage way up in the canopy and all the way down to the ground. Jays, same. Vireos, we want our little vireos. Those groups forage from ground to treetops. So you need to start thinking in terms of the vertical vegetation that you're putting in your yard, as well as horizontal plantings. A pollinator garden is not just flowers. It is native vegetation, trees and shrubs with flowers mixed underneath, a canopy of trees, an understory of shrubs, and then your flower beds. Flycatchers, these are birds that require meadows. They fly out and they actually catch the insects in the air. And if you don't have meadows where there are insects flying over, grasses and perennials that are producing insects, these little guys can't make a living. So host plant choice matters. When we talk about host plants, those are the plants that butterflies and moths lay their eggs on. And here are some examples. Here's serviceberry, which hosts 81 species of Lepidoptera. We add caterpillars to our landscapes by adding the native plants that make them. So here's Ceanothus, which hosts 93 species of moth and butterfly. And willow, which is a keystone plant on the West Coast. This is our top producing plant. 312 different species of Lepidoptera utilize this for larval food. Willow is also an extremely early blooming tree, and our native early flying bees require the pollen from willow. There are willow specialist bees that need that pollen. So the bees are a whole other story that I'm not really touching on much here. So a keystone plant, I'm going to use this term a lot. What's a keystone plant? Well, white oak in Oregon, oaks and willows and wild cherries prunus, our Klamath plums and our choke cherries are our 3 top keystone plants. If you can put these on your property or in your yard, please do so as soon as possible. So the keystone refers to this, remember from your history in elementary school, that special stone in the Roman arch that allowed the arch to remain upright. And if you take out the keystone, the whole arch will collapse. So those trees and shrubs and perennials that are hosting the most caterpillars are what we call our keystone plants in the ecosystem. They are going to produce the most food for our hungry birds. Here's cherry, our black cherry. This is choke cherry. So Western cherries that you can grow, they host 240 species of butterfly and moth, bitter cherry, choke cherry, and Klamath plum. Those are keystone plants that are easy to put in your yard, and the Klamath plum actually does produce fruit. You probably buy that from one of the native plant nurseries around the state. Put it in your yard. You have food, and so do the baby birds. So here's Bradford pear, which is a non-native, and it's planted everywhere. And Bradford pear only supports 11 caterpillars. So there was a study in July of 2014 where the caterpillars right at eye level were counted. They found 11 caterpillars, 1 species. This does nothing for the ecosystem, and look at how much space these are taking up, and then they get loose. So here is our black hawthorn. It can produce, it hosts 80 different species. Burning bush, here's an invasive non-native species in Oregon, and it hosts 1 caterpillar. So these are getting loose into the environment. They're going all over in the ecosystem, and they're producing nothing. That is not a buffet right there. That is, a starvation plant. If we add the caterpillars in our suburban ecosystems by planting natives, then you're not just feeding birds, you are breeding birds. They will build their nests in your shrubs and trees. They will feed their young from the food that your yard produces. You don't need to rip out all your non-native plants. However, to sustain bird populations, the estimate is that about 70% of your yard, just to maintain what we have now, not to bring them back from the impending collapse, but just to maintain the levels we have, that we need to aim for 70% native vegetation. And people go, well, I can't do that. I can't. That's my whole yard. Well, but think, if you have an oak tree in your yard, you're doing it, you're estimating your vegetation by the green biomass that's out there. And a tree has a huge amount of biomass. So you could have some other things that you like to look at, those beautiful flowers that you like from other countries. If you've got big keystone trees and shrubs in your yard. So, but the rule of thumb is aim for 70%. So think of that green biomass in your yard. 1 large tree plus some shrubs can be up to 50% of your vegetation. And making the insects is going to support life. So mountain lilac, that one you just saw, all of these butterflies lay their eggs on that plant. And more. I mean, there's many more than that, but I just put a few representatives of it. So if we talk about the diversity of keystone native plants, the core genera, the most powerful plants we have when we're choosing for our landscapes, if you put in a willow, like we said before, you'll get 312 species. If you add a cherry, then you've added 200 plus more. And the species that lay their eggs in cherries are different generally from the ones that lay their eggs on the willow. So each family of plant hosts a different suite of moths and butterflies. Add a poplar, now you're up to 700 species of insect. Add an alder, and you can see how the numbers increase as you add different keystone plants to your environment. So if you have land where you can put a bunch of these different trees, or even if you have a 1/4 acre lot and you can put a little pocket forest of 2, 3, or 4 of those trees, 5 of them, then you have 1,900 different species of caterpillar in your yard. That way, if something fails, you know, some certain type of insect population crash happens with one of those species, you've got all these others there for the birds to feast on. All right. So when you buy a plant at the nursery, you're buying a bird feeder. So stop thinking of bird feeders as just the seed feeders that you buy at, you know, Friends of Wildlife or whatever the nature store is. Yeah, those are great for feeding in the winter, or, you know, and supplementing. But really, the bird feeders that you need to be buying are native plants. Native plants are bird feeders. You get to decide whether the feeder will be full or not. So you're going to the nursery and you're choosing a plant. If you buy a willow, yay, your bird feeder is full. If you buy a ginkgo, which only supports 4 species of caterpillar, oh darn, your bird feeder is empty. So I know the ginkgo is beautiful, but let's think again about putting that in our yards. Maybe we shouldn't be demanding ginkgos from our nurseries. Native prunus, 240 species. Nandina, heavenly bamboo, it's in every yard in my neighborhood. Every yard, because it was one of the landscape plants that got put in when the housing project was built. And unfortunately, the berries can be toxic to our cedar waxwings, and that is because of the way cedar waxwings feed. A robin can come by and eat 10 of these berries and go on his merry way, and he's fine. So this is an Asian plant, right? And the robin can go on his merry way, whatever, he's fine. The cedar waxwings come in and they gorge. They eat until they can't eat anymore. Now, if the berries are at a specific level of ripeness, the seeds contain cyanide and the birds will die as a result of you know, lesions on their internal organs from the cyanide. So you know, if you're going to grow that in your yard, please cut the berries off. Don't let the birds come in and eat them. Instead, plant this native viburnum, 31 species hosted on this plant, and there are these beautiful edible berries that our native birds can eat, and nothing bad will happen to them. If they're fermented, the cedar waxwings might get a little drunk, but they'll recover and they'll fly away eventually. Cedar waxwings are known to get drunk. Always choose a native when you can. Here's Oregon grape. It also has these beautiful berries that our waxwings and robins and every other fruit-eating bird can eat. So plant choice matters. If you want to find native plants that will work in your area, this link, and by the way, the slideshow will be available to all of you at the end. It should be up on the website. This is Native Plant Finder. If you just Google Native Plant Finder, the National Wildlife Federation site will come up. You type in your zip code and it will give you a list of trees, shrubs, and native grasses and perennials that are appropriate for your area, that are native to your area and a keystone in your area. So step 4, avoid or minimize the use of pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides. They should be pretty self-explanatory. Use integrated pest management practices. So don't just go to the nuclear option right off the bat. You want to make sure that you're allowing your home environment to come into balance so that if you're planting the correct plants that we'll talk about later, then you'll have beneficial insects who will take care of the pests that you might be seeing on some of your plants that you're worried about. If you're growing natives, you'll need far fewer chemical inputs and hopefully none of these. If you see one of the following names listed on an insecticide, it includes a neonicotinoid. Neonicotinoids are systemic insecticides that the plant takes up through its tissues, including into the pollen and nectar. But it's never listed as neonicotinoid on the label. It's listed as one of these. So you really have to know what those are to avoid them, because they do interfere with pollinators, queen bees' abilities to relocate their nest. If they're taking in pollen and nectar that has this stuff in the plant tissue, it messes up their navigation abilities. So, and of course, again, from your science lessons in school, you understand that when we pour something on the environment, and so we're going to try and get rid of this pest, we're going to spray the plant, and the plant will take up maybe 2 to 20% of that. 80 to 98 of it goes in the soil, where it kills soil organisms. It leaches to the stream, where it kills aquatic arthropods. It runs off into the surface water. It gets in the seeds of the plants. It gets non-target insects like our bees and butterflies and the creatures that eat them, right? So you want to really be careful about choosing something like mosquito spray. Don't spray for mosquitoes. It kills everything, even though the companies will tell you, oh no, it won't harm anything else, or it's all natural, it won't hurt other things. No, all natural insecticides kill all insects. So pyrethrins are natural insecticides. Nicotine is a natural insecticide. It's harmful. It will kill things. So native plants should need fewer or no chemical inputs because they've evolved. No one's fertilizing them or spraying them up on the hillside, right? And they're evolved to deal with the insects that are feeding on them. So you don't need fertilizers, you don't need pesticides, you save money and have less maintenance. So when you choose a native plant for your yard, focus on these 2 groups of insects. Caterpillars, which we've already covered, and pollinators, bees and adult butterflies and moths. And so step 5 is to build a pollinator garden. Now we're getting to the flower garden. And you want to put in things like Pearly Everlasting, which is a host for painted lady butterflies. And I'm not going to show you this video. You can probably link to it once the presentation is. It's a really cool video about how insects see in ultraviolet. And so the way their vision is different from ours. So major pollinators, these are all, this is a bee, a wasp, this is a cuckoo bee, a sweat bee, butterflies, honeybees, 1 species of honeybee, and 4,000 species of native bees. So we want, and 14,000 species of moths and butterflies. So lots of things out there visiting our flowers and needing clean pollen and nectar. They're critical for our pollination needs, so we want to plant for them. Here's huckleberry, a really powerful plant. Native bees and honeybees use pollen from goldenrods to provision their nests. So they'll gather the pollen and the nectar, and they'll make a little ball out of it. And then they'll lay an egg in it, and then they wall that egg and on the pollen ball off, and they build another, what's called a cell, and they gather more pollen and nectar, and they do it like that. So most of our things are, our bees are single moms doing all the work. So the most productive native plants for bee specialists are these: the goldenrods, the willows, asters, blueberries, golden tops, eutamia, fringe loosestrife, and sunflowers. Yes, though, even those sunflowers that you grow in your vegetable garden. This means that there are 11 species of bee in North America that have to have goldenrod, or they can't reproduce. They must have it. Same thing here. 8 species have to have willows, or they cannot have a place to reproduce. These are the specialist bees, but if you plant those 7 species of plant, you'll get 40 species of specialist bee on just 7 plant varieties. And generalist bees will use those plants as well. Generalist bees can use a lot of different pollen and nectar to provision their nests. So really important to plant for the specialists, and then you'll get all the other guys at the party too. Monarch butterflies have to use goldenrod to build up their fat reserves for the long journey south to overwinter in the Central California coast. We have lots of other butterflies that migrate as well. So they need goldenrod, they need late blooming plants. So think of plant families. Plant the carrot family for our little tiny predatory wasps. Our natives are lomatium and angelica, but you grow some of these in your garden: dill, fennel, coriander, and parsley. The mustard family, these are, again, are tiny little flowers so that tiny little insects with itty bitty mouth parts can get to the pollen and nectar, right? They need to be able to access that. Not all bees have long tongues, so you want to make sure everybody's able to eat in the garden. Our aster family, really important, especially asters as a late blooming plant for bees. Daisies, sunflowers, yarrow. Mint family, the salvias, our horse mint, monardella and sages, our coyote mints. We sell a lot of these plants in our nursery down here at the extension in Jackson County. Bunch grasses. People don't think of grasses when they put in their flower gardens, but bunch grasses are incredibly important because our little skipper butterflies have to overwinter and reproduce in bunch grasses. That's what they use for habitat. And so if you're not putting in California fescue or Lemon's needlegrass or Romer's fescue, those little butterflies don't have a place to live. So choose native plants if they can work in your yard. Avoid nativars and cultivars. This is the natural echinacea. Now, this is an eastern species. It's not native in Oregon. This is the cultivar, but that's sterile because all of this elaborate petal stuff going on here, they've just made more ray flowers out of these inside flowers, and the bees can't access any nectar in there. That's sterile. It's not providing anything for the pollinators. Native elderberry looks like this. Don't put in these purple cultivars. Don't put in cultivars that have different colored vegetation, because the chemicals that they produce, they're not going to be recognizable to our native. So different flower color than the native plant, different leaf color than the native plant. Avoid those things. The chemical signals just aren't there for the insects that need them. And double flowers, not a good thing. Good eye candy for us, starvation for the insects. Our pollinators need plants that bloom over a long period of time. So you're going to choose a variety of annuals, perennials, ground covers, herbs, shrubs, trees, grasses, all those good things that bloom across seasons, starting in January, hopefully, and going right up through, until first frost in, well, wherever you are. You're up further north than me. Now our first frost down here aren't until like November. So we've got a long bloom season here now. You need to plant for food and nesting opportunities for your insects. And bees need pollen and nectar to reproduce. We have 800, we used to think we only had about 500 native bees, but since the bee lab at OSU started, we've now found we have over 800 species of native bee in Oregon. And then they nest in the ground or in woody stems or in pithy stems or in hollow stems. And there's a pithy stem. And here are woody stems. These are just bamboo tubes that somebody hung up, and the mason bees have come and filled them. And here's an example of what leaf cutter bees, by the way, if you see this cut out on your leaf in your yard, that's a good thing. That big circle, that means the leaf cutter bees are in your yard and they're reproducing. They're building these nests. All right, resin bees and mason bees. Really industrious little single bees, and then of course the ground nesting bees. Please avoid putting these kinds of things up. They look great, they look really cool, and you can buy all kinds of them at the nursery. Don't do it, because bee hotels and commercial bee houses have problems. These are mites, hairy-footed pollen mites on a mason bee. These houses concentrate your bees and attract predators and parasites. They have to be maintained, and most people don't maintain them, and they concentrate disease. If you plant native plants and leave the stems up over the winter, the bees will have a place to overwinter, and it spreads them out through the environment, and they're less likely to be diseased or predated. Okay, so think about that. Step 6 is to leave the leaves. And you go, oh, no, I can't leave the leaves. You know, my HOA won't let me. Sweep them up under your vegetation. If you've got plenty of vegetation, what we're looking for is to produce a soft landing for caterpillars that have been growing in the trees, but caterpillars don't pupate in the trees. They descend on a silken thread to the ground. And if they hit the lawn or a raked area or gravel or dirt, they can't make it into the soil to overwinter and pupate. So you've destroyed the benefit that putting a native tree in if you don't have a soft landing under it for the caterpillar to land in and get down under cover for the winter. Really, really important. Leaves are not litter. Leaves are habitat. So 70 species of moth and caterpillar eat dead leaves. They go down there and they eat dead leaves, fungi, and lichen. So stop calling leaves litter, start calling them habitat, and think of them as habitat. All of you have seen flickers and robins in the winter digging through leaf litter in your yard. They're looking for food. They need that food. So leave the leaves. Species of moths, these are all species of moths that overwinter in the leaves or in the soil under leaves. The leaves provide insulation for the caterpillars that are pupated in the soil. Leave the leaves. Thousands of species of native flies breed in decaying vegetation. This is a soldier fly. It looks sort of like a wasp to some people. It's not. It can't even feed. It comes out of this larval stage, and after it pupates and becomes that fly, it has to breed within a couple of days, and then it dies. They are really good for breaking down compost, and those are bratwurst for winter for birds that are looking for food, right? They're critical, nutritious food for lots of animals, not just the birds, lizards, amphibians, all kinds of things. And here's a little long-legged fly. This fly's larva is a predator, and it feeds on fungus gnats and aphids and thrips. This is a good guy. He's not a bad guy. Not all flies are like house flies and annoying. Syrphid flies, hover flies. There's the hoverfly larva eating an aphid. And flies are the second most important pollinators after bees. So we want these little guys. Here's food in the stems of plants. This is a gall. And this woodpecker knows that inside there, there's a wasp larva, and it's going to get it out of there. It's going to get its winter food from that gall. This is a goldfinch gathering seeds from an aster, an artichoke. Leave the stems, leave the seed heads. They're providing food. Leave the leaves and build a brush pile. So you can see putting down logs or wood when you can provides enormous habitat for any number of species and allows good fungal production and mycorrhizal production in the soil. So very, very important. There's nothing like down wood debris or bark to help things like turtles and lizards overwinter and shed their skin and that kind of stuff. So plan for water, cover, nesting sites, and food. And then finally, step 7 is to turn out the lights. Lights cause tremendous trauma to our insects. They're drawn to these and they exhaust themselves going to the light when they should be mating and increasing their numbers. Lights are problematic for migrating birds. We lose millions and millions of birds every year by window strikes in cities where the lights are left on. Really bad. So turn out the lights so they don't confuse and exhaust our pollinators. Use motion sensor lights. So if you're worried about your yard, I mean, in my neighborhood, everyone has their porch lights on all night long. They leave them on because they're worried the bad man is going to come. Well, if you have motion sensor lights, when the bad man comes, the light will turn on and he'll run away, right? And you'd be surprised how often the bad man does not come in most neighborhoods like I live in. There's no need for these people to be burning up the street with their lights. Or install yellow lights. If you just have to have the lights on, take out the kind of blue, white lights and put in yellow lights. So you can save the world. And that's your homework assignment, is to look at your yard and think about those 7 steps and which one or several of those you can do and make America native again. There you go. All right.
Well, wow. All I can say is wow.
As I rant at you.
I am very, you talked fast and you had a lot of slides and you covered a great deal of information. And I'm very glad that we're putting this up on our website because it should be up, everybody, by the end of the week. And I'm going to have to go through this again. So
yeah,
I can.
It's a lot. And so, there are links to the Tallamy presentations and Homegrown National Park and all kinds of things here. And so if people, want the slide deck or they want, a PDF of the slide deck, or they can go to your website and look at it again and they can flip all through that. So yeah.
Wonderful. I'm now going to go through the questions that have come in.
Great.
So Greg asks, when planting natives, how long should we irrigate before we can let them find their own water?
Oh, that's a great question. Really good question. Usually I tell people, and it depends on where you live. If you live in an area of lots of rainfall, you probably don't have to worry too much about it. Where I am down south, I tell people water them for the first 2 years, but you don't have to water them every day. They're not going to like that. At least our southern ones don't like daily water. But, maybe a couple times a week the first year or 2, and then down to once a week in the 3rd year. And eventually you should be able to back off the water almost entirely with our native plants. Once they get those roots down, they're going to be able to access the moisture that's in the lower levels of the soil. So that was a really good question. But they do have to be babied sometimes for the first couple of years. So keep an eye on them. Yeah.
And from Lou, do you have recommendations for removing butterfly pea? We've been fighting it in our yard and have found it difficult to remove without harsh chemicals like Roundup.
Butterfly,
Butterfly pea is what is written. I'm
I
not
don't know
familiar
what
with.
that is. I do not, I'm not familiar with that. I will say that I am not, I if people are willing to dig out stuff, I mean, I've got Bermuda grass in my yard, which I cannot dig. It's just covering everything. Um, if you're willing to hand dig things, that's the best way, or keep cutting them. And you can spray them with agricultural vinegar, the 30% vinegar that you buy like at the Grange or, you know, the nurseries. And that will not destroy the soil and those kinds of things. The other, sometimes in the case of a very strong invasive plant, what some of the agencies have gone to now, rather than broad scale spraying of all the vegetation, they will chop into the stem and they will directly squirt into the cambium layer and a systemic herbicide. And that will go down to the roots and kill the plant. But you're not broadcasting it all over. I tell people, take a paintbrush and a, you know, and a paper cup and cut the stem. If it's something that has a large stem, cut the stem and paint that chemical on the stem, and that will target just that plant and nothing else. And I really hesitate to even tell people to do that, except that sometimes it's the only way with some of these invasives to be effective, like Himalaya berries in our area. Himalaya berries, that's how you've got to get rid of them. You have to kill the root, you know. So it's problematic because I can't be a total purist here.
Okay, next question is, Kathy wonders if the research about the number of pollinators and butterflies and stuff that are on our P&W willows, cherries, and oaks, is it really from our Western varieties, or was this extrapolated from East Coast species?
No, it's from our Western species. There have been studies done. Yeah, because our oaks only support 250 something species of, but Eastern oaks, some of the red oaks on the East, it's over 500 species. So they are done
Okay,
on the basis of the area they are found in. So, and that's why willows are our keystone, our big top keystone species here. Whereas in the rest of the country, it's usually oaks that are the heavy lifters.
oh, okay.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
a second question from Kathy is, are you aware of any research on the impact of cars, hitting insects and birds as they travel?
I am not. I do not know about, yeah, the impact of the cars. I just remember from my childhood.
Oh, I do too. I
Yeah,
remember what it
yeah.
was like when I was a kid.
It's astonishing when I, thought back about it. It's like, no, we used to have to stop all the time to clean the windshield. Yeah.
Okay, and here from Kathleen, how late into the spring do we need to wait before we can clean up the leaves? Deep leaves can hamper small spring plants that I have, like oxalis.
Right. So, and I would say if you know where your oxalis is, scrape the leaves back away from that. And I would prefer that you not clean up the leaves, but move them into under an area of shrubbery or under a tree, or somewhere where they can decompose naturally, because they are adding invaluable organic and fungal matter to the soil. They're providing food for the soil insects and the overwintering insects to eat. But yeah, I mean, if you know where your special flowers are in your flower bed, then obviously you don't want to put the leaves there. You want to pull them back when it's time for them to come up.
Okay, and Donna says that she has a number of large laurel trees. What's the best way to get rid of the roots of these trees to plant natives in their place. So I guess you would like to take them out altogether.
Right, is that English laurel?
I'm assuming it is.
Yeah. So I would do, the way I would do it if it were on my property, I would do what I call terminal pruning, which is at ground level, you just hack those things off. And then again, take that herbicide, and it could be something like crossbow full strength, and paint it on the stumps. That will keep that from sending up sprouts, because if you just cut that off at the base, it's going to send up new growth. It's just like coppicing, right? Which gives you new, fresh,
Yes,
strong growth. So you want to make sure you stop it from doing that. And that's the kind of instance where I would use that technique that I talked about with the herbicide.
okay. And the next question is, does it matter what kind of willow? This person has pussy willow. Does that count?
Yeah, pussy willow it's a North American native. It's like an east of the Rockies, but it's fine. It will work. It provides pollen in the spring for bees. It will host a lot of North American caterpillars that we have here. So sure, that's fine.
Okay. And Rosa asks, is there a website with a list of natives that are more shade lovers? Or would the website that you gave, the native plants one, would it have?
You might have to do a little research, but I'm guessing you could Google shade loving natives of the Northwest and see if a list came up that way. And when you go to Native Plant Finder, and Audubon has one of these sites, Xerces has lists of plants that are good for pollinators and Lepidoptera. So there are lots of resources out there. You just kind of got to do some searching, and you probably are going to have to look specifically. Oh, Oregon Flora. OregonFlora.org has a gardening page, and when you go in, you can put in the parameters of shade as one of your parameters.
That's right. You can. That's a great suggestion.
Yep.
Sometimes. Well, Lynn, I want to thank you very much. This has been a wonderful presentation, and the questions indicated that people were very engaged and listening the whole time. So thank you very much. I'm now going to stop the recording, and if you're Washington County Master Gardener, please hang around for our chapter meeting. Thanks a lot.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.